All right, I have to give a little bit of a warning. This episode does have themes of suicide, so let's dive right in. If you don't want to go in, please do not. Your safety is what matters. Okay. To my dad, pity was love, which is why he loved it when people pitied. It meant they cared, and also forgot to ask him if it was reciprocal. Yet I found the quality annoying on him. As we walked through the Basilica, he proceeded to talk about these mysterious suicide attempts without mentioning who, what, where, and why. They were just his whale calls for pity, and I did not bite. Instead, I had a much darker thought. Well, you did not succeed. When your abuser is in church with you, at a weekend trip to see if you can reconcile, and decides to invent suicide attempts, it is annoying. First, my dad knew I had two of my own, and I had details. With that in mind, he tossed the line like it was a Pikachu at a Pokemon match, and then proceeded to move on to another self-pitying conversation. I was instantly annoyed because the weekend was about him trying to prove that a decade without me in his life made him realize he should have been better to me when I was in it. Instead, he could not stop talking about either A, spoiling his other family, B, childhood traumas that were so old and stale they might have been at the inauguration of the Basilica 700 years ago. It was overwhelming me because my father only gave me around 20 minutes to say what over 20 years of his abuse had done to me before he felt too uncomfortable and started making fun of a gardener that accidentally hosed himself. No joke. He literally interrupted me to laugh at a gardener, and I was midway discussing the time he abandoned me day one in my master's program by cutting the first bank account he opened to fund my education. Yet I digress. As we walked around with families by the dozens, lighting candles to saints, the thought permeated my brain. What if he had succeeded and done so when I was a child? My conclusion was right, but tragic. My life would have been so much better. The fact that my dad wanted pity from me was another red flag for his lack of remorse. You do not want pity from your victim if you are handing them a genuine apology. What you want is mercy, a form of love born from forgiveness that you humbly request. My dad did none of the above. Yet my father oddly wanted me to talk him off of a ledge he was never on. And in truth, I had every right to push him off. This was the man that verbally, mentally, emotionally, and financially abused me for over 2 decades, and he was informing me I could have been rid of him sooner? Even if it was by his own hands, it meant a few less years of crying myself to sleep so much, eventually I tried to end me. The moment stood out to me for 2 reasons. First, my dad forgot I'd had my own attempts and was not going to bring it up. I have never once trauma bonded with someone and walked away feeling like they understood how I needed to be loved over how I did not want to be hurt. So I was not bringing it up. Second, it was a moment when we had no compassion for each other. I would have felt relieved to have had him out of my life so much sooner. And it was so clear he did not care about mine. The thought felt dark and even too sinful for a church. Within days, my dad would be sending me a "you deserved a better father" text. That was the last thing he would say, and it pissed me off. You deserved better is what you text your ex-wife after finalizing the details of your divorce. Not to break up with your daughter. It was such a cop-out statement because I was the only child my father decided to abuse and not pity. So this was a really hard episode for me to write and relive because I was very bothered by the fact that I was not moved by my dad. And you don't know my dad. He's somebody that really loves when people feel bad for him, and he will just say anything. So when he said, I tried to end me twice, it was so tossable. But it landed on me because A, it meant he didn't remember my own attempts, and B, this weekend was about me, about him showing humility, about him trying to make up for all the abuse he had caused me and kind of show that he's not that person anymore. He is a better human being. That abuser is in the past. But one of the hardest The hardest thing to accept about my father was that he would never grow. He would never change. He would never become a better person, because people who like to be pitied, they are people that usually see life according to images. Who really does want to be pitied? There's something about that that's just not tasty unless you go for the superficial and the superfluous. And my dad did. He was not a good human being, but he understood that enough that he would always try to look good, even if it was at the cost of me and my own well-being. So when he brought that up, I was like, oh, wow, he doesn't remember. And then he just moved on in conversation. And it was really, really hard writing this episode and kind of digesting that moment. But I felt like I needed to talk about it, because I say that one of the reasons I'm doing Daddy Recovery is because of YouTube comment sections. I watch a lot of ASMR and Reiki videos. And if you ever go and watch those videos, what you're going to see is a lot of, regular schmegular people like myself. And they're talking about their traumas and their feelings, and they're writing their elaborate stories of pain. And I cry, and it makes me feel so less alone and admirable and angry at the same time, because sometimes I really do wish I was alone in my pain, and to see how common it is, my story. I think men who have multiple families, like my father, I don't even know if I know all of my siblings, but I do know that he was consistently telling me about how well and how lavishly he was treating his other family, and then proceed to berate me spiritually and make fun of me, call me names, yell at me, make me cry, come up with some scheme for me to lose money, that instance where he opened up a bank account and he took me to the bank. And he said, this is a part of our new era, something that he would say often when he was on a redemption arc for no one. And he said, I'm going to pay for your master's program. I had gotten a scholarship, but nobody gets a full scholarship to master's programs. And it was abroad. And the day I landed abroad, I went to get out money, and the bank account was closed. And my father blocked me an email, and I was emailing him. My mother called him, and suddenly I get an email back, and my mother said what the email said, and it was basically, you misunderstood. I never said I would pay for your master's. How could you be so selfish? Those things are expensive, and you've got to earn your way. And I cried. I cried so hard, because I know my father can do better. He was just choosing not to do better for me. Because if you're telling somebody all the time, I treat my other kids so great, and you see them all in, designer, and they're getting jobs because he's using his contacts to make sure they get jobs and go to the best schools, and he doesn't do that for you. What he's showing you is, I don't choose you. I don't love you. I don't want you to get better. I actually want you to suffer. And I have an upcoming episode where I call my dad Ted Bundy, and you'll see why. But to give you an excerpt, I feel like my dad used me as the only one he could actually unleash his darkness on, because it doesn't leave. It's there, and it's scratching the walls. I want to be mean. I want to be mean. I want to be mean. But if I'm mean to these people, he was very scared of his other wife. He said that she would get him arrested, that she was very evil, that she was ugly inside and out. And I felt like what you're telling me is that you respect fear. You don't respect love. And when he talked about attempting suicide so fleetingly, he totally forgot I did. And he didn't care. And again, men with multiple families, I think they treat their kids like ice cream flavors, and they have the tendency to like really like one kid for a while. And then, that kid is chocolate, and now they're on to strawberry. So they're hanging out with strawberry more. And I was never my dad's favorite. He always hated me. But it took me a while, as it does a lot of people, to kind of understand that it's not my fault, but understand also that he was evil, and be allowed to say that to myself, because he was so adamant that he was not a bad guy. He was just lost, and I wasn't that good of a kid. And one of the most painful things that I realized in writing this episode, for however brief it is kind of that my dad, it wasn't just that he chose not to provide for me, is that he chose to abuse me and convert me into this person that couldn't provide for themselves, didn't have the confidence, was always choosing people that were like her abuser, aka my dad. Exes, friends, that emulated his form of abuse, speaking to me with like vulgar and calling me names. And it was a lot. It was a lot. And I do this because I want to heal, but I really do hope that this podcast and this series finds people that really need to know it was them. It's not you. You couldn't have made them love you. You can't be love if you're always plotting and scheming and focused on your image. Those people don't love. They just want to be loved. And I stopped loving my dad, because to love him was to not love myself. And when that truth is your father, it's hard. It's hard. So prayers up to everybody, and follow Daddy Recovery.